Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Business Stories. You've got me, your host, Dr. LL, and every week we bring you fantastic people. We've got someone here now from Kansas City, although when we hear his story, it sounds like it might go beyond that. We've got Edgar Palacios, who is the founder of Revolución Educativa, RevED for short. He's given me the grace and space to be able to use the short form, so we'll be doing that. Edgar, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. L. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you've done so many incredible things. And before we get into all of that, I always like to paint the picture for the folks that are listening to our podcast. Yes, they can get the full visual experience if they're on our YouTube at Midlife Success, but a lot of folks just like streaming, right? From whatever their platform of choice is. So, can you describe either yourself and or your background, the room that you're in, so our watchers and listeners get a visual?
I'm so excited for this question. So right now, I am sitting in our office building in Kansas City, Missouri, in the historic Northeast. I'm in a small conference room. The screen is absolutely blurred, but behind me, there's like a calendar of events. I'm wearing a really cool dark blue patterned shirt. And then I have short hair, and I've recently have started experimenting with like my first mustache. I don't know if it's going well or not, but I have hair over my lip, so it's going in the direction that I want it to.
Well, you'll be ready for Movember, right? The
Absolutely.
fundraising event. Yes,
Yes.
yes. I know many of my friends' husbands and significant others have participated in that. And by the end of November, around Thanksgiving, we're all like, all right, it's got to go. Shave it off. You've got some, like, I don't know, dead animal on there, like on your upper lip. It needs to move.
I am hopeful to get to that experience and then to, finally have the freedom of having a clean baby face.
Well, there you go. And again, this is the fun part of the podcast, before we get into all of it. I also like to ask our guests, what are you? Not your business, not what you do in the business. What are you, Edgar Palacios, really good at? What is your superpower, as they say?
Wow. These are fantastic questions. What am I? I've been exploring that question, I think, very deeply this year. I'm about to turn 40 at the end of the year. And so it's been a really interesting year of reflection for me. And I've been exploring new things. First and foremost, I'm super committed to being outside these days. And so I'm enjoying nature. I'm enjoying hiking new trails. I've gotten into kayaking recently. And so I love being on a river and floating by myself. I'm a dad of three, a husband of one. My wife Laura is an incredible business owner herself, and she has given me the flexibility and freedom to like try new things like professionally and really just been supportive of my efforts as well as how we think about the world and what our common goals are. Um, I would say that I used to go by the term community leader. People have bestowed that title on me. I've actually recently kind of disassociated with that term. I think about community leadership as something where people have elected you or chosen you to represent them. I find that in my work, I have a distinct kind of opinion about how the world should work, and I don't presume that everybody has the same opinion. So I feel more uncomfortable with this idea of community leadership, thinking differently about this idea about a leader in the community, right? I'm definitely representative of my community, and I definitely am committed to my community, and I'm aware that I'm one person in a sea of many. And so on that side of things, I also enjoy, I just recently discovered this band called Avenged Sevenfold, and I am not a rock and roll person by any means, except that like recently I've gotten into it. And so it's really heavy rock and roll music. No idea where it came from, but I really enjoy it. And so that's a little bit about who I am today.
Well, a couple of touch points there, Edgar. So, one, I think the power of music to just transcend us, get us into a new space.
Yeah.
My stepdaughter is big into country music, and so I've been kind of embracing that genre and experimenting with that. So I think that's fun.
Yeah.
On the hiking front, autumn is absolutely my favorite time of year because I get to go outside and the bugs aren't eating you when you're in the forest.
Absolutely.
And right, I'm a big practitioner of the Japanese philosophy Shinryoku, which is the forest bathing. So you go
Okay.
out, you enjoy, you connect with nature. There's no cell phones, no any of that nonsense.
Yeah.
Now, that said, We do bring the cell phones just in case we get
Right.
lost, which is every freaking week because my
Yeah.
husband's always thinking, oh, let's take this trail. This is unmarked. And I'm thinking, no, no, there are no tags on here. And then inevitably we get lost and we need to break out the cell phones to figure out where the heck we are.
Absolutely. I'm gonna admit this publicly for the first time. Um, I, One thing that I've been doing in kind of the forest and the trees is I've been talking to them. And so I will gently place my hand on a tree, and then say something to the effect like, I bring you greetings and gratitude, and I invite you to offer me wisdom. And it's been really cool to connect with nature in that way, and to kind of learn, right? And to really think about like being present with nature, understanding that there's a lot of things that nature has to teach us. And then I had a friend, Rito Martinez, recently challenge me to say, instead of you observing nature, what would it feel like if nature observed you? And so I haven't experienced that yet, but I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks just being out in nature again and kind of shifting into that mindset. And I appreciate you sharing about the Japanese forest bathing thing. I think that that's really awesome, and I'm going to explore that a little bit.
Well, I think it's so important. We as founders, as entrepreneurs, small business owners, all of that, we don't always get the time that we need to recharge.
Right.
And everything, it's like, oh, you got to be tethered to your phone. You got to do this, you got to do that. And I am just about becoming that crazy lady that yells at the people that are walking their dogs that are on their phone and not paying attention, and the dog's
Yeah.
walking onto the street and the dog has a 10-foot leash. I'm thinking, like, what are you doing? The phone down. How much time do you give your dog who gives
Right.
so much back to you? This should be dedicated time between you and your dog. Focus fully on that and embrace it, right? I'm all about that too. Start the day with gratitude, meet the day and say, "Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for what I've got so far. What can we work on together today?" Right? And just bring that mindset back to
You know,
slowness.
I think that practice is so important, right? Because I think one, particularly in my context, this is a very difficult political environment, a very difficult world in some ways. The people that I've committed to serving, are in danger in many ways, are struggling in many ways. And yet, there's this thing about pausing and being present and understanding that sometimes like the solutions are not in the hustle, they're in the quiet, right? And so I did this at Costco recently, which was hilarious. I was just there, I was walking the aisles, and I was just really grateful for the opportunity to spend time with my wife and one of my kids, Isabel, and just roam the aisles. And I was like, you know what? It's luxurious to be able to do that and to be able to look at overpriced, boxy things and say, like, you know what? If I want that, I can probably get it. And gratitude is such an important part of my life in this moment, and hopefully for the foreseeable future as well. But yeah, I think particularly when you're a founder and you have multiple ideas and multiple projects and you're always seeing solutions to issues, it's important to take that moment to pause and really say, hey, like taking care of others is important. Taking care of yourselves is equally important. It's a symbiotic relationship, and I think that matters. And so, yeah, absolutely, gratitude is important, critical.
And embracing the moment, bringing it full circle back to the music. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the grocery store and I don't even remember what the song was. And I'm like, and I'm like, jamming and I'm holding my cart and I'm like, and I'm trying to tune out all of the chaos that's going on around it because everybody's scrambling. Need food. I got this. I got that. You got crying kids reaching for everything on the shelf, all of this. And as I
Yeah.
was in my little space in my, I guess, Zen mode, do 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 dancing, come around the corner, and there was another guy about my age who was doing the same thing with his cart. And he was like, and we almost had a head-on collision. We looked at each other and just started laughing our heads off. Like, all right, yeah, we're enjoying the grocery shopping experience.
Yeah.
Too, I loathe it as a chore, and I always dump it on my husband. But that's another time for another conversation. So let's get into this. I do try to avoid the political landmines and hot
Absolutely.
potatoes that are out there,
Yeah.
but with you in servant leadership for the Hispanic community slash Latinx community, I know that there's some differences there, so we'll get into that.
Yeah.
It's got to be extremely challenging right now. How do you make noise in an environment where you may be subjected to consequences if you're too noisy? How do you
You know, I
balance that, Edgar?
yeah, I think that's such a I think it's a reflection of who you are as a person, right? And I think um, one thing that I am reminded of is that I don't know if it's a political thing as much as like something that we've experienced throughout time, right? Particularly in this country, we have a history of marginalizing certain groups, and we understand that, not everything is equal and not everything is equitable. And I don't, I think this is more of an idea of a group of people refusing to see other people's humanity, right? I really like fundamentally think about it in that perspective. I will say that certain politicians make it more difficult at times. And I also recognize that like the work hasn't really shifted, right? The conditions have shifted. Um, and then that leads to kind of your risk tolerance, right? I think we actually have to offer a different alternative. Particularly in my community, there's a lot of conversations around the contributions of immigrants. There's a lot of conversations around whether you should be bilingual or not, whether you should embrace speaking Spanish and outside or not. There's conversations around whether DEI is a bad word or not. And I think um, my opportunity and what I see in this moment is the ability to shift that conversation and offer a different perspective, right? I think diversity, equity, and inclusion are important in the work that we do. I think they make the world a better place. I do think that immigrants are making incredibly positive contributions into our community, and we need to honor those contributions, and we need to like show up for them, right? These are human beings who have decided, to leave everything they know and to come to this country for a better place. And I will say that this is probably a marketing issue, right? Because I think America has done a really fantastic job of telling the world that we are the best country in the world and that we're a land of opportunity, a land of freedom, right? And so I always get a little surprised when people are shocked that people want to come here and to explore that and to experience that because like as a small business, America would say, hey, like come and join us and live your best life. And so when people have questions around that, I get a little, it's curious for me. Um, but around this idea of, potentially having consequences, I think there are consequences to not speaking up in this moment. And, as I think about the next 20 to 30 years of my life, and I think about the contributions that I want to make as a human and and how I want to serve, I think it's important to offer those alternative narratives and to say, like, actually, like, the world can be very different than people think. And, somebody's, I, I heard somebody say recently, I think his name was Byron Sanders, who said, sometimes you have to be a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Lighthouses are designed for dark nights. They're designed for stormy weather. They're not designed for cool, calm, and sunny skies. That's not what it's about. And so, choosing to be a lighthouse in this moment, I think, is an important choice. And I invite others to be lighthouses, right? I invite others to lean in and to really offer their perspectives of what's important to not just this country, but to humanity in general.
Oh, I think that that's beautiful. I'm sitting there going, I'm gravitating towards that message and just not just the message, but the call to action that you've just put out there. Be a lighthouse.
Yeah,
And we hear the news, we hear different things, like, for example, farm farmlands now are missing over 1.5 million migrants, largely who do the all of the farmhand work. And as a result of it, all kinds of crops are rotting, they're going fallow. We're going to have a ripple effect into food shortages. The
yeah,
farmers who own the lands aren't going to be able to sustain them. So you think about the impact, and it really all comes down to, and I think that this is the part that's missing, is that we've really lost the plot around humanity, how
yeah,
we feel that we can treat each other or should be entitled to treat others. It's it's really shameful. And I've seen this in my personal circles, I've seen it in professional
yeah,
circles, I've seen it in political circles, and we've just gotten so far away from what we're supposed to do. And as leaders, I always teach this in my adaptive leadership programs, that it has to be less about diversity, less about equity, and less about inclusion, given the environment that we're in, but it can't be less about help. If you are climbing the ladder and you are raising your arm, grab the rung ahead, one up, but have that other hand down so that you can be grabbing one other person and pulling someone else up with you. That's something that I try to live by.
yeah.
And through your efforts in education, I really see what you're doing in the Latinx education collaboration and RevED, which is Revolución Educativa. So to help folks that are coming, into these circles and to find their
Yeah.
path forward. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing, what's missing, and the gaps you're trying to address.
Yeah, I think one thing that not everyone may be aware of is that Latino students are the fastest growing student population in this country in K-12, right? And it's not just in this country, it's in Kansas City, but it is around the country. And so in my community in Kansas City Public Schools, that number, the percentage of students is probably 30% that identify as Latino, Latinx. Across state line in Kansas City, Kansas, in their district, it's roughly 60% and plus. And so the idea is that we have this whole community of folks who are here, right? They're engaging, they are showing up to schools every day, and they're slowly, actually not slowly, they're quickly growing to be the majority community in a lot of districts that we serve and that we see. And so for us, we haven't seen the same amount of Latino educators or Latino administrators or Latino adults that are in positions of power, of influence, and decision making. And so part of our work is to ensure that young people have access to folks that are proximate to them, that are part of their community, that are able to understand the nuances of our community, and that are able to inform and create better educational experiences, right? And so when we started the LEC, it was around this idea that we need more Latino educators in K-12, right? And we also need to retain them. Recruitment and retention are two different things. They are affiliated and aligned, but like we all understand how costly it is to bring in a new member versus retain one, right? Um, and that's important, but over the years, our work has expanded because we understand that educators aren't the only adults that have a say in a child's educational experience, right? We have parents and caregivers, of course. We have community members who are making decisions, civic leaders who are making decisions. We even have students themselves who are actively engaging in their own education, making decisions about it. And so it's really about how do we create those conditions that are necessary for the advancement of Latino youth. And we believe that by doing that, we actually are improving the experiences for everyone, right? I was born in Miami, Florida. I grew up in a community where, Spanish was spoken everywhere. I grew up in a community where we had access to food from around the globe. I grew up in an incredibly diverse community and, it was a given. And then my family moved us to Spokane, Washington, and I used to joke and probably still do that, there were two things missing from Spokane that Miami had and Spokane didn't, and that was beaches and Latinos. And
And
you know,
sunshine,
in
right?
sunshine, there's some moments of sun in Spokane, I will say, but not as much as Miami for sure. And then we moved to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and I went to high school in Cape. Um, my experiences weren't positive as a Latino student. I would say that there was a lot of discrimination and racism that I encountered just because I was different, right? I looked different. My like engagement was different. The way that I thought about the world was a little different. And I experienced that a lot. And so that foundational experience has really driven this idea that we have more Latino students in our communities today. And my goal is to make their experiences better than the ones that I had. And that is by including adults who are from those communities and are able to understand the challenges and also the solutions to create just those better educational experiences.
Talk to us about what you think is missing from the educational experience, because it's not just Kansas City, as you said, or nationwide in K-12. I know here on the East Coast, and a lot of the Jersey colleges, there is a fast growing group of Latinos, Hispanics who are in all of the associate's degrees in the 2-year college programs, just booming with
Yeah.
Latino registration. So what's missing? What are schools getting wrong? And then tell us what they're getting right.
Fundamentally, I think it comes back down to humanity. I think whether it's young people, do we see this as human and deserving of our empathy, compassion, love? Adults, do we see them as human and do we see them as worthy of our empathy, compassion, and love? I'm not suggesting that love is the solution or that just simply seeing somebody as human will fix things, but I think it's a great place to start, right? Um, I have experienced many different ways of being with schools and educators who maybe not don't believe in the capacity of young people, right? They may diminish like with their expectations of what's possible and what young people can do. And I think that that can be very harmful over the years, right? Because as an educator, you don't just have the same kids year after year, right? You're not just impacting, 20, 25, 30 students a year. You're impacting hundreds of students a year. And then you multiply that by as many years as you serve. And all of a sudden, there's a community of people that you've directly influenced in this way. And so our goal is that educators can appreciate um, the ability for young people to belong, right? And I think adults have to model that. I think district leaders have to model that for their educators. Like we have to be in community and we have to ensure that we're creating spaces where people feel um, valued and welcomed and important, right? And I think that that can be missing sometimes because they're, if we're driven by goals and outcomes and we divorce those goals and outcomes from people's experiences, then we're creating situations that we see in corporate all the time, right? We see corporations, burning people out for the very same reasons that we see education and education professionals leaving the profession. So yeah, I think humanity's missing. I also think as a society, we do not value educators.
Oh,
And
amen to that. I mean, not to interrupt. I mean, the
yeah,
average salary, right?
right,
60,000 for a teacher, that's changing the trajectory of your children. And a professor, after
right.
all those years of school and PhD, is 81,000. Get the
Yeah.
hell out of here.
And I think that's such an important point because, right, in this country, like we demonstrate value by tying it to compensation, right? If we don't think you're worth a lot or your profession is worth a lot, then we're not going to pay you, as much as other professions. I was hopeful that COVID would shift some of that, right? When we as parents actually had to teach our own kids and we had to discipline our own kids and we had to spend more time with our kids. I was hopeful that there would be a resurgence of respect and of value in educators for their contributions. And so I'm disappointed that, a few years after the pandemic, that we're kind of right back to the same place that we were, right? I don't know if we've innovated much as a country or as a community around different ways of thinking about education, different ways of valuing educators, different ways of doing school for young people, right? The young people have shifted. They've changed. They are different. Their access to the world is very different than the ones that I grew up in, and even more different than the ones that, my ancestors grew up in. And so, the fact that there hasn't been a lot of evolution within the profession, and that there hasn't been a lot of evolution within the actual field of education is also, I think, part of the challenge, right? We have not adapted well to the new times and to new communities and to um, to new ways of being.
I want to chip it away a few things there, Edgar.
Yeah,
So, one, you'd said that we were kind of back to where we started. I think we've actually gone in the other direction where we have less respect than we've seen maybe ever before. There's no respect for authority, no respect for educators.
yeah,
People are pointing fingers back and forth, everything from getting into words, right, and arguments to physical violence. So,
yeah.
comment on that. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I do think that there has been some regression, right? And we see this, whatever's happening in the political level is happening, in your local community, right? And I think this is where those two things tie. And um, I would say that education is also political, right? Like how we choose what to teach, who to teach, and why to teach them is a political act and a political decision in itself. But yeah, I think that if we aren't able to figure out as a society how to value each other and respect each other as humans, right? As is very general, like this is we are all human. Then
At least most of us. There's a
at
few
least
I suspect, but yeah.
I think then it just becomes a very different and terrible conversation because then we have to, yeah. I think that it would if let's talk about it from a different perspective. We spend a lot of time and energy in Kansas City talking about inclusive prosperity, right? And one of the things I like to remind folks is that prosperity isn't inclusive if it doesn't include folks at the margins, right? If they're not benefiting from prosperity, then like we've already missed the mark on inclusive prosperity. Let's talk about workforce development, right? Who do you think the future leaders are? It's our young people, right? Who do you think the future workforce is? It's our young people. And the fact that we don't invest as much as we could into young folks, we're also deteriorating our capacity to like have exceptional, uh, leaders and workers and contributors in the future. And so I don't think that we are very good at, long-term strategic planning as a country. I think that we are very much more in the day-to-day in the weeds, so to speak. And so we miss out on opportunities to really be mindful about our investments and how we show up for people and how we show up for future people in our communities.
I think that really sums it up. Everybody is so captivated in a me, right? Selfish world that we've kind of lost the interest or lost the capacity to be able to help the next generation that's coming up. As I said, everybody needs to have the hand in both directions. I want to talk about even the community. So it's almost become, I think, a glib statement that people make where they say, oh, I want to be seen and heard. That's what inclusion means. That's what creating psychological safety. What does it really mean to be seen and heard as a Latino?
Let me break that down further. I think it's absolutely important to create spaces where people can be seen and heard, but that also is a reciprocal relationship, right? In order to be seen and heard, you have to see others and you have to hear others, and you have to create space for that. Um, as a Latino, whew, it means acknowledging that the Latino community is incredibly diverse, right? It means acknowledging that, you know, um, we transcend race, we transcend language, we transcend nationality, we transcend cultural elements. We are an incredibly transcendent community. Latinos occupy 20 plus countries in the world, right? And that we all have different traditions and ideas and values, and we are not a monolith. I think that's important as a Latino community to be seen. I think for a community to be heard, um, we actually have to like get into the weeds with them. We actually be at the grassroots level. I think that's so important. And so when you're talking to somebody about their experiences, one, language access comes to mind. It can be difficult in some parts of this country to actually be able to navigate, a community, right? If you don't have resources in your native language, can be difficult. And if you don't have people who speak the language around you, and like it can be a very lonely experience. So to be heard would actually also mean, to like create those opportunities and resources, create those welcoming activities that allow people to engage and that they can build the capacity to learn a different language. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we creating a space where people can actually like want to do that and want to create those connections? Because they genuinely do. Um, I think it also means that we have to elevate our voice. In the state of Missouri, um, that I think Latino registration is we are good at registering Latino voters, but we are the least engaged. So we're not going to turn out for elections. We're not going to turn out for certain activities. We're not going to be as informed as other voters collectively. And so that's a huge issue, right? If we don't understand the power of voting and the power of getting your voice heard and, of having an opinion, then we actually can't dictate or influence like what's going to happen within our neighborhoods, within our community. And so I think that that's also important, right? Activating the community to show up, and to give them reason to, because I think when you talk to your average Latino person, they're going to be like, my job is to keep my head down and to kind of continue to do what I need to do, and then one of my friends would say, she talks about her experiences, and she says, calladita te ves más bonita, which means quiet, you look more pretty, right? And this idea that like we don't have to make waves. I think in this country, whether you're running a small business, whether you're running a corporation, whether you're doing nonprofit work, you have to learn how to make waves, right? You have to learn how to create content, so to speak. And you have to like put yourself out there, right? That is how you become successful in this country. And so people who don't have access to doing that, like that's it's something that we have to kind of maybe shift. Um, while, and I'm rambling a little bit, but I think this is important, while also preserving your heritage and the things that make you who you are. And I think that is so important, right? Like learning to adapt to certain cultures and customs and things and preserving the essence of yourself, right? Said differently, learning how to preserve your humanity in a world that often doesn't see it.
Oh, bingo, bingo. And I'm just curious, little sidebar. Are the ballots for voting in Kansas City in Spanish and English?
That's a good question. If I just learned this recently, if you have a subset of the population that is large enough, you are the government is legally required to offer ballots in multiple languages. So there are areas in Kansas City that yes, you will get. You can choose to have, or you can ask for a language or a ballot in Spanish. In places like Kansas City, Kansas, that is not yet something that's available to folks, and so they're in Kansas City, Kansas, they have a higher population, I would say, of Latinos in general, and they have a higher population of Spanish speaking Latinos as well. And so some of them can actually vote. Some of them, have gone through the process and all these things. So they're unable to vote without an interpreter, and other stuff. And so it becomes a more difficult process. So I know that the ACLU is actually working on a project right now to see if they can actually make that happen at the city level in KCK.
Well, there you go. And I
Yeah.
was just intrigued by it because the neighborhood that I live in, the ballots are in Korean and English.
Yeah.
They are not in Spanish. And so I was thought like, oh, that's interesting because there's such a high population of Hispanics in the area. But anyway,
Yeah.
sidebar, let's get out of that rat hole. Edgars, we're getting ready to wrap up our show. Can you
Yeah.
tell folks where they can find you?
Absolutely. So if you want to follow our work, you can follow us on all socials. So at Latinx Edco, LATINX EDCO. You'll find us there on Instagram. You'll find us through LinkedIn. You'll find us on Facebook, and that's pretty standard for us. If you're looking for our more political and advocacy organization, that's going to be at RevEdKC, at REVEDKC. Again, we have standardized all of our handles and whatnot, so it's easy for you to find us. And then if you want to connect with me, I'm at EJPKC2. I had to delete my old account, so the two
Well,
was
there
the
you go.
addition.
Right?
Yeah,
We can find you there. We can put those details in the notes. All
yeah.
right. Last question here for Edgar Palacios, the founder of Revolución Educativa, RevED, and the president and CEO founder of Latinx Education Collaborative. Edgar, if we peeked into your closet, and again, for those that didn't have the visual experience, Edgar's got this, like, as you described, fabulous shirt. It's got some hibiscus and vines and other sort of patterns on it. So I'm
Yes.
thinking you're a patterns guy, but okay, let's
Yeah.
hold up. If we peeked into your closet, is there a pair of footwear, shoes, sneakers, boots, a type of shirt, other wardrobe, accessory that personifies who you are? So when you look at that piece of clothing or footwear, whatever it is, it says like, ah, yeah, that has Edgar Palacios written all over it. What are we looking at?
So there's a couple of items, and the first one that I'm
Of
going
course,
to
there's a
share
couple.
about. I got these boots in El Paso, where my wife is from, and they are blue cowboy boots essentially, but they extend a little bit further in the front part of the foot, and they have snake heads on top of them. So they're beautiful blue. They have snake skin. They're snake skin boots, I guess, and they have like snake heads on top of each boot. And my funny story there is that when I asked the bootmaker like what kind of snakes they were, he goes, "Oh, they're just your regular snake." And I thought that was hilarious. Um, I also would say that one thing that I really appreciate are short sleeve button-ups, and they're typically going to have some sort of floral pattern, right? I really love the colors blue and orange, and so you're going to see me in a lot of those colors. And finally, I would say shorts are so important to me. Like I hate wearing jeans. I hate wearing like long pants of any way, shape, or form. Like that's my Miami traits. And what else? What is uniquely Edgar in there? I think those are some pretty standard things. But I definitely like a good button up with short sleeves. I think that's an important part of who I am.
Excellent. So we always have to end with that kind of silly and signature question. We've asked 250 plus guests that question, and I think it's only been a couple of times that we've had the same answer. So there you
That's
go.
awesome.
Yeah. So with that, Edgar Palacios, thank you so much for being on our show. We wish you continued success in helping the next generation of Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, right, and Hispanics and all of the above really get in some headway and get the support that they need to be able to flourish in their path forward. Thank you, Edgar.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I so thoroughly enjoyed this, and thank you for the work that you do.